There are a ton of cheap quarterbacks this week. Which one should be in your lineup? And is there enough value on this slate in order to start two high-priced running backs? We'll cover those questions and a whole lot more on this week's edition of the Football Guys Daily Fantasy Power Grid, presented by DraftKings. It's week 11, and we are wondering what Vegas foretells for this week, John. Can you tell us, what are the Vegas lines leading you to believe?
I mean, I don't know what's going on this week. This is the first week. I mean, we have vaccines announced on Monday, and all of a sudden it doesn't look like 2020 anymore. There are only two games with Vegas totals over 50 points. Those are Atlanta at New Orleans, which is typical. We have that every year. It's like years past. And Green Bay at Indianapolis with a 51.5 point favorite. Everything else is low. There isn't a single team with an implied team total over 30 points. We've got three right around 4 touchdowns. That's Pittsburgh, a heavy home favorite against Jacksonville. James Conner stunk recently. The question is, can he capitalize being a 10.5 point favorite over Jacksonville? New Orleans at home against Atlanta. We've already talked about them. And the Chargers with, they got a quarterback with a fresh haircut that Devin is ready to talk about. They're 10-point home favorites this week. Austin Eckler's not back. Is there a running back there that we can take advantage of? A lot of questions. And this week, unlike last week where Mike Davis was $4,000 and looked like a sure thing, this week, I don't think there are a whole lot of sure things. And so it's going to make for some really, really interesting lineup construction, not just in cash games, but also GPPs, because we're not going to see 50% rostered on certain folks like we did last week with
Mike Davis.
Mike Davis, and there was another one that was also Aaron Jones was 40+% as well. So this week we're not going to see that. So it's going to be an interesting week. And I know, we've had some discussions behind the scenes. I think there are some disagreements. It's going to be an interesting show. And, this is your opportunity to pick your favorite football guy and roll with that individual, because I don't think we're going to be in a lot of the same picks this week.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned Mike Davis, because there was some confusion last week because DraftKings priced Mike Davis at $4,000 on the main slate and a much higher price on the other slates. So just keep in mind that sometimes the sites have different prices for the same player on different slates. It doesn't happen a ton, but if they make a mistake on that first slate they release, sometimes they'll revise it on the future slates that they release. Devin, let's talk about quarterbacks first. There's a ton of quarterback injuries, which may open up some cheap quarterback plays. We've got Drew Brees out with a rib injury. Matthew Stafford got a limited practice on Thursday, but he's got a thumb injury on his throwing hand. Teddy Bridgewater's gotten limited practices on Wednesday and Thursday, but he's a little iffy for this week. Drew Lock got a limited practice in on Thursday. Again, kind of iffy with a ribs injury. And then Andy Dalton's back. Not that anyone necessarily cares about that. Devin, give me the lowdown at quarterback.
We're not going with Herbert. I can't trust a quarterback who has the decision-making to get that awful haircut. Go look it up. He is no longer the Air Bear. He's like 13-year-old boy. Anyway. I'm going Lamar Jackson. I'm finding a way to spend up to at the top, if I can, and go with the quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens. So this Tennessee defense, I mean, look, Jackson has his limitations, right? But can we agree that he's as good of a passer as Nick Foles and Gardner Minshew?
Yes.
Both of them threw for 340 yards and 3 touchdowns against this defense. So... And what's interesting about Jackson is he's running more over the last 3 weeks. So over the last 3 weeks, he's ran for, I believe, an average of 70 yards in each of those weeks, and he's scored in two of those games. So he's starting to go back to the Jackson of old. And yeah, there's that terrible haircut from Herbert. It's really.
I like the glamour shots background with the neon 80s look. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Whoever did the third ground lasers deserves an award, man. That is great.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, Jackson's going to be a little bit tough to afford. I love him on FanDuel. He will be in my cash lineup there for sure because of the rushing upside. DraftKings, if you can afford him, I think he's the top play this week. He's in a tremendous spot. Going down a little bit. I don't know. There's sort of like 3 or 4 guys in this range that I don't really love, but they're all decent values. So you have Alex Smith. I don't trust him at 5,300. He's going to be somewhat popular coming off of what was his best game of his career. If I'm going in this range, I'm probably going with Joe Burrow at 5,500 against Washington. So I tend to think that this Cincinnati offense is starting to get the ball moving, and we'll talk about wide receivers in a minute, but there's a wide receiver on that team that I absolutely love this week. And really, I think that there's a couple that are producing and are in good spots. So Burrow is probably the cheap play. If you can go up and get Jackson, I highly recommend that you do that.
Bill, I saw you flash the yellow black-eyed Joe on the Joe Burrow pick. Is he your cash game quarterback?
Yeah, he's the one. And I think that he's the one because we don't have Patrick Mahomes this week. We don't have Kyler Murray. We don't have Josh Allen. We don't have Russell Wilson. So this is kind of like the cash games of old where we're looking to spend down because there isn't those quarterbacks at the top that are giving us such a massive scoring advantage. And I think Burrow is easily the guy. At 5,500 on DraftKings, if he gives you 16 to 18 points, he's not killing you, and he's more likely to exceed 18 points. He's done it in 6 out of 8 games this season. So I think he's incredibly safe. That game is going to be played up in pace. Both Washington and Cincinnati are borderline top 10 in situation neutral seconds per play. So we're going to see a lot of plays run in that game. And it wouldn't shock me if Burrow gets to 50 pass attempts. He's done it before. And based on what we saw from Washington last week, it could definitely happen again. I agree with the Lamar Jackson love, but I had him as more of a GPP play. And Devin's call for cash games makes me wonder if we're going to see his roster percentage rise headed into the weekend as people start to kind of get more and more on board that Tennessee matchup and the fact that Jackson's looked pretty good in his last 2 games, completing over 70% of his passes in each. Phillip Rivers just had a 300-yard game with no interceptions against the Titans, which is pretty incredible for Phillip Rivers and says a lot about that Titans defense. And, Vegas has Baltimore as one of the highest scoring teams on the slate. That offense runs through him. We know that he's got a ceiling. We just haven't seen it. So if he was going to stick in that 5% range for GPPs, I did like Lamar Jackson, but now I'm kind of second guessing if by the end of the week he's still going to be overlooked.
I have him at 14% right now.
14%. I think that is higher than he'll end up. I think the truth lies probably somewhere in the middle. But I kind of started out thinking, everybody's fallen out of love with Lamar Jackson because he hasn't flashed that ceiling this year, and now he's the most expensive quarterback on the slate. But
I think there's 2 reasons for it. I think we'll get into tight ends in a minute, and there's probably the worst price player on this slate is Mark Andrews. So there's a perfect stacking opportunity there. And then the other thing is, if you look at quarterbacks with rushing upside, and rushing has really dominated this year, he's really the only one that has that. I mean, I guess Cam, maybe, but he's the only guy that you're going to get that rushing upside from.
Yeah. I was looking at Cam, and I mean, I like him. I like the matchup against Houston, but he has 3 touchdown passes and 7 interceptions this season. Like the running back numbers are literally all he's bringing. So I wonder about his ceiling, but I'll kind of, I guess, stop there, and then we could circle back if nobody names the one other guy that I've got on my list.
Yeah, and I think that Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews stack is cash viable, right? I mean, I think a lot of people play that in cash. John, tell me, who do you like at quarterback?
Well, I mean, I'll start this part of the show by saying this is a tough week. I don't like cash games this week, and that's not to say that you shouldn't play them. I think If I'm telling you that I don't like it, it typically means that there's probably a pretty big edge for folks who are doing their homework going into the weekend. So from that end, I'll definitely be in cash games this week. But I'm looking at this and I don't see a lot of value. There are two players I like. We'll talk about them in the next segment. But outside of that, I'm not comfortable with anybody right now. That said, the person who I'm most comfortable with was mentioned tangentially. That's Phillip Rivers against Green Bay. He's 5,600. Of the past month, the guy has scored 19, 22, and 28 fantasy points. And the game where he didn't deliver 3 to 4x on this week's salary at 5,600 was a game against Baltimore, which is one of the better defenses in the league. In terms of my points projection value, he's the third highest rated quarterback on the week. And I think that he's viable both in cash games as well as GPPs, because I think he's going to be relatively overlooked. The only other player who I would consider at this point for cash games, that person hasn't been mentioned at all. And the reason I didn't mention him first is because he's about $1,000 more. That's Deshaun Watson at 6,500 going up against New England. That game, in terms of, we talked about 50-point potential from Vegas at the top of the show. It's sitting around 49 points, so it's right there. And Devin was talking about running quarterbacks and what they've done this year. Deshaun Watson has about 30 carries over the past 3 games, so maybe not quite the extent of what we've seen with Lamar Jackson, but he's offered at an $800 discount on DraftKings. So those are 2 guys I think you can go with in cash this week. And again, I don't love either one of them. I did notice as I was talking that Devin put up the red black eye Joe, and why not? Because I'm talking. So at least do that. But I get it. There just isn't much I like this week. It's a tough position. And go ahead, Devin. I know you. I
just wanted to bring up: is there any concern with Rivers if Jair Alexander is back?
I think he's gonna be back, but they throw the ball
based on
a lot of
your DVOA
stats,
and we all know about them. They were they were 4th best. They were first a couple weeks ago. So I think that their 4th is probably about where I would have them. So I think that that's probably right. With Kevin King and Jair Alexander, if they're both back, it's a tough one.
But they mix the ball around, right? I mean, they throw to a lot of different receivers. They throw to the running back. They throw to tight ends. I mean, maybe T.Y. Hilton gets locked down on the outside by Alexander. But I do think that they mix the ball around enough, and he's cheap, right? He's 5,600, and he allows me to get at the 2 guys that I want this week at another position.
So can I throw one more guy out there, and that's Carson Wentz at 5,700. Right now, Carson Wentz is projected to be 1% to 2% rostered. And part of that is this Cleveland secondary has put up very, very good numbers over the last 2 weeks. However, if you think about their last 2 games, they've been in 35-mile-an-hour winds.
Right.
So part of it is the matchup is they're not nearly as daunting of a matchup as what they're otherwise supposed to be. They have some glaring holes in their secondary. I think at 1% to 2% owned or rostered, you could see a 300-yard game and 3 touchdowns from Carson Wentz at 5,700.
I actually wanted to. I'm sorry, Austin. I actually wanted to ask Devin, real quick, as the Browns guy, that is. What do you expect from the Browns in this matchup? Do you think that they have a good game against Philadelphia? Because I think that's key in Wentz's performance. I think you want to see Philadelphia get down and then Cleveland let their foot off the gas a little bit in the second half. And that's when Wentz has traditionally shown his heroics, brought them back, and put up numbers. So that's the game script I'm looking for Wentz. But I did want to ask you that. Like, what do you – could this game be sneaky high scoring?
I think every Browns game could be, right? So Baker Mayfield throws 3 picks is always in the realm of possibility. And is there a 1% chance that he does that? Absolutely. Which gives short field, and it's a high-scoring throwing game. I think there's a 10% chance that it's a high-scoring 35-31 type game, which if he's 1% to 2% rostered, why not? And on the other side of the ball, there's no way I'm ever playing Baker Mayfield. So, like, even if he was 0% owned. So, no, I mean, Travis Fulgham is in a good spot going up against the veteran Terrence Mitchell. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think that Carson Wentz is fine. Tight end has been a problem for Cleveland in the past decade. So we'll talk about that later.
Phil, did your one GPP guy get mentioned already?
No, I was just going to say that Matt Ryan, in one of those two games where there is a 50-point over-under, he should be getting Calvin Ridley back. The Saints D is pretty good, but the last 2 weeks they kind of had that wonky game where they rattled Tom Brady, and then last week they made me look really stupid for coming on here and saying that people should play Nick Mullins. But, other than that, they've allowed multiple passing touchdowns in every game this year. We know that Matt Ryan has 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in him anytime he takes the field. So I don't hate it because I think he's going to be largely ignored, and, he's got some good stacking partners.
Yeah, and coming off of a bye generally pushes down the rostership percentages a little bit. Let's move on to running backs. But before we do, thanks to a couple of our listeners who recommended that we take on this new thing of recapping our cash game plays at the end of each section. So it sounds like Devin likes Lamar Jackson with a second place Joe Burrow. Phil likes Joe Burrow. And John is in the Phillip Rivers, maybe Deshaun Watson kind of camp. Is that fair, guys?
You got it.
Right.
Yep.
And get us to 12K subscribers. So if you're not subscribed, hit the button. We'll do something if we get to... We're at 11.9. I don't know how close we are, but if you're not subscribed, what are you doing here?
Let's talk about running backs. We got a few guys we're keeping an eye on. DeAndre Swift, after practicing on Wednesday, went into the concussion protocol on Thursday and missed practice. That's an interesting one to keep an eye on. Usually if someone enters the concussion protocol midweek, they're probably not going to play. Alvin Kamara missed practice on Thursday. He doesn't seem too concerned about it, but it's something to keep an eye on. And then Matt Breida looks like he'll be back after missing a game. He practiced in full on Wednesday and Thursday. Phil, let's come to you first and talk about running backs. Who do you like?
Yeah, that DeAndre Swift news really put a damper on my segment here. I was all ready to talk about him and how rational coaching finally won out, and he's a new bell cow and he's getting the Panthers. It was going to be great, but I don't know. I guess we're going to have to skip past that now. If he does somehow... Listen, if he does somehow play, I like him at 6,400. I know that the other guys might not like that take based on how we were talking before the show, but I think Swift is awesome, and if he's active, I'm playing him. But I guess we'll go then for cash games to the most obvious play on the board, and what will probably be the most popular play, not only in cash but also GPPs, and that's Dalvin Cook at 9,000 on DraftKings versus the Cowboys. Vegas likes Minnesota for 28 points, and if there's a possibility there that the Vikings are going to score 4 touchdowns, very easy to envision Cook getting a couple of those, along with 100-plus yards. Dallas has allowed 9 rushing plays of 20-plus yards this season. That trails only the Bengals, Texans, and Eagles. And long runs are Dalvin Cook's specialty. So in cash games, I am not setting a lineup that does not include Dalvin Cook. And also for cash, and I'm interested to hear the takes on this one, I really like Duke Johnson, even though he disappointed last week. I'm just willing to throw that game out. It was basically played in a hurricane. So offensive production was completely ruined. I happen to think Duke Johnson is a skilled running back. We know that he could catch passes. New England has been struggling against the run in recent weeks against the Broncos, the 49ers, and Buffalo. And Johnson, even though he disappointed everyone, 93% of the running back touches, and he only came off the field for 3 singular snaps. So where else are we finding that workload at 5,400? I don't think it's out there. So I think Duke Johnson is very, very fine for cash.
John, what do you think? I saw you kind of give mixed signals about Duke Johnson there.
I mean, he comes up as a value guy on my list, and but I mean, I watched him last week. He just looked flat. He looked like one of us trying to run behind that line. I mean, he's a guy that when he was in Cleveland, they used to throw the ball to him. Last week, when they had this opportunity to throw to him, he had one target last week. Is that right? Yeah, one target last week, and he's maxed out at 4 targets all season. I don't hate the call, Phil. He did not look good to me. He did not look good at football, to use one of Devin's expressions, and that scares me a little bit.
The problem is Deshaun Watson doesn't throw to his running backs. He didn't throw to David Johnson. He doesn't throw to Duke Johnson. Carlos Hyde last year. Well, Carlos Hyde can't catch the ball anyway, but Lamar Miller never caught the ball. So it's not a situation where all of a sudden he's going to be peppered with targets. That's the problem. And if the 0-16 Browns are trading away players, like there's two people that believe in Duke Johnson, Phil Alexander and Bill O'Brien, and Bill O'Brien's not employed. So
he's had 30 carries over the past 2 weeks and 90 yards. I mean, and they're not against good defenses either. I mean, Phil, I'll probably play him, but I'm not playing him in cash. I can't bring myself to do that.
So what about Houston's offense looked good last week?
I mean, nothing.
Nothing, right? So let's just throw it out and move on. David
What about
Johnson
the week before when they scored 27 points?
So Antonio Gibson or Duke Johnson? For me, it's Gibson. Yeah, and the price difference is what, $200?
Well, in cash?
Yeah.
Duke Johnson.
Now you're just being stubborn. No, I mean, look, Antonio Gibson is the play in that range at 5,800 against Cincinnati. We talked about the J.D. McKissick is in play too. I think that both of those players are in play. I don't love McKissick as much just because a lot of his targets came in the first 3 or 4 drives, and then he's not a good running back. He's a guy who's going to see 7. You're hoping for 7 receptions, and then maybe he gets there. But Gibson has looked good most of the year. At 5,800, he's a guy that I'm really interested in. Duke Johnson, I just can't get behind.
And Devin, would you pair him with Cook in your cash game lineups? Gibson and Cook?
Yeah, Cook is a must play. I think that's the first name that you're playing. I know John is going to talk about Alvin Kamara and wanting to play both of those guys, but I can't do it in cash, and I struggle with it in GPPs. In a GPP setting, I might consider fading Dalvin Cook as much as that scares me, because he's going to be, John talked about no player being 40% owned or rostered. Dalvin Cook is going to be 40% rostered, maybe higher. And I think my current build has him at 44%, and Alvin Kamara at about 13%. So you could see a lot of Alvin Kamara out of the backfield like we saw last week in a GPP format, which makes him really intriguing. Kalen Ballage is the other guy I wanted to talk about going up against the Jets. So, I mean, we all know about the Jets. They're not a very good team. Sorry, Phil. But Ballage, if Austin Eckler is out, right now he's not officially out. He's trending, looking like he's out. But Ballage, I mean, the coaching staff has came out and said that they're going to try and get him more touches, and they're going to try and see what he can do. And this Jets team really has struggled. So they're coming off a bye, but they allowed 71 yards and 56 to Damian Harris and 56 yards to Rex Burkhead. Neither of those two are really good running backs. And on the season, they're allowing about 5 yards a carry and about a touchdown a game. So if Ballage is the primary ball carrier there, he's definitely interesting. He's not the most skilled guy. He's been on about 7 teams this season. But I think that he's in a spot where, look, Miami has a history of not knowing what they have in running backs. You look at Kenyon Drake, and he goes to Arizona, and he has some performances that are decent. And Ballage isn't going to, blow your socks off, but he's averaging 4.2 yards a carry, and he has 33 carries in his last 2 games. Like at 5,600, somewhere in that range, to average 16.5, 17 touches, I'm in.
You like Ballage more than Gibson in cash?
I like them both, but I think he's probably safer. Particularly, I think Ballage is safer. And the reason I say that is you look at touches for Gibson, 13, 6, 20 from a carry standpoint.
All over the place.
That's 6. If he gets 13 to 15, fine. That floor for Gibson is too low for me. If they get behind early, there's a game script where J.D. McKissic has a majority of the plays there.
John, what do you think? Who are you playing at running back?
I mean, it's not a free square; it's an expensive free square. But Dalvin Cook is the guy this week that you want to build your lineups around. He feels to me to be the quote safest play. In 2020, that really hasn't worked out, the safe play, but that's the one that, at least for cash games, that I'll be building around. He is 9K, but he goes up against the Cowboys. They're touchdown home favorites with basically a 28 point implied team total. He should see the ball 20, 25 times, and I think he's the guy you got to build around. I did like DeAndre Swift for many of the reasons that Phil told us about. I do think, and this is off the cuff because we don't have new projections. This is like literally an hour before we went live. I do think that Adrian Peterson becomes interesting because I do think he'll absorb that role. If you look at snap counts over the past few weeks, don't be dissuaded by the split between Kerryon Johnson and Adrian Peterson. I looked as Phil was talking. It's about the same, but what's going to happen is you're going to see Peterson shift into that first down role, and I suspect he'll get the lion's share of the carries. See what I did there? At 4,000. The other one I'm surprised the guys didn't mention, Joe Mixon. What's the story with him? Looks like he might not play, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't look like he's playing.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And what about Gio at 5,500 going up against the Washington football team? I think he's borderline cash viable at this point in time. He's $5,500. When we're talking about those guys like Antonio Gibson and Duke Johnson, I think I prefer Gio over them. I know he didn't do much last week, but he went up against the best defense in the league in Pittsburgh. I think that's where I want to go. And then the other one that Devin said that, I wanted to talk about is Alvin Kamara. He's 9,200. And I think that's really where you need to ask yourself as you're building out your cash game lineups. I mean, I did it earlier and I shared the lineups with these guys on the show. You can get there, but you're going to have to take some chances at other positions. We'll talk about who those might be and the opportunity cost that's built into spending $18,000 on two running backs. The upside is that you're going to see probably 45 touches, and on two very good offenses. So, as I said in the top of the show, a lot of different ways to go this week. But I do think, in terms of cash here, we're going to go Dalvin Cook, probably Gio for me, and then you have to make a decision for Kamara, because if you do that, you're going to have to spend down at wide receiver, tight ends, defense.
Everything.
And,
How many points do you need from them for that to work out? 60? 55? Probably 55.
You probably need 55. I suspect. I mean, we'll see what happens. Last week looked like a high-scoring week, and it turned out you could win tournaments with 180. So this week looks like a low-scoring week, and if that's the case, you probably need 135, 140 to win. So it'll be interesting. I mean, as I said, at the top of the show, it's with a limited scoring and no big favorites. I think there are a lot of different ways to go this week. But those are the guys I like in cash. And then for GPPs, I mean, nobody's going to be on Derrick Henry this week against Baltimore. Nobody. Guy's one of the more talented backs in the league. He's $8,000. We just talked about how there's no value anywhere. And if you like that Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews stack that Devin referenced earlier, which I do, I think you can plug Henry in there because Tennessee has demonstrated in the past they don't care if they're down. They're going to keep feeding Henry, and we know he can break an 80-yard touchdown at any point in time. And if he's going to be on 3% of rosters, that's my guess. Devin, do you have a number?
I have 4.5 right now, but who knows?
So
everything's changing with Swift and what that's going to do.
It's going to. Yeah, it's going to. So I like Derrick Henry, and any other guy I like that I won't go into it because I feel like I've been talking too much. But Zeke Elliott, in the history of football, I don't think we've ever seen him so cheap at 6,500. Andy Dalton is going to dump passes off to him, trash time, garbage time. He's very easily capable of scoring 22 points or whatever. I guess 26 points is what he needs for GPP value. He could definitely get 100 yards against this team and a touchdown or two and be just fine at less than 10%.
Phil, did you want to mention one more guy?
Yeah, I had a couple of guys for GPPs, but an overall theme that I noticed this week is that if you want to get unique at the running back position, you're looking for talented guys who are not in the best of matchups, but who are just good enough to overcome those setups. I think Ezekiel Elliott is definitely one. Derrick Henry is definitely one. And the last one on my list, much to Devin's chagrin, is Miles Sanders. Sanders was the victim of bad luck last week. If you look at his workload and his usage, he was immediately reinstated as the bell cow, and people that are chasing box scores are going to look at the random touchdowns by Boston Scott and Corey Clement and think that he's in some sort of timeshare. But Sanders was in on 72% of the snaps, handled 77% of Philadelphia's touches out of the backfield. And he's a guy that he just does not care what defense he's playing against. Right before he got hurt in weeks 5 and 6, he had long runs of 74 yards in back-to-back games against top 5 rush defenses, DVOA, just to give a little extra dig at Devin on this.
It's predictive, apparently.
Against the Steelers and Ravens. Those are 2 of the top 5 rush defenses in the league, and Sanders tore them up. So against the Browns, we talked a little bit about it with Wentz. If that game is like the sneaky high-scoring game on this slate, which I am not ruling out, I think that Sanders will come in less popular than he was last week, probably by about half. And if he doesn't score 20 DraftKings points, I will tattoo a black-eyed Joe on my neck, and I will debut it at Thanksgiving dinner with the family this week.
Holy cow.
A real tattoo?
I will tattoo black-eyed Joe on my neck.
Uh-huh.
Devin, did you want to mention one last guy?
Don't make bets that are going to lose.
He's going to get hurt in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
James Conner against Jacksonville is interesting. I don't think he's going to be that popular as a GPP play. And I just wanted to circle back a little bit and recap where I'm at from a cash perspective. So
sure.
Dalvin Cook for me, Kalen Ballage, and then Antonio Gibson are my 3 that I'm playing this week.
Yeah, it sounds like everybody's on Dalvin Cook this week, and then it sounds like Phil's going Duke Johnson in cash, and then John is going with, who was your other guy, John? Oh, Gio Bernard?
Yep.
Right on. Okay, that's our recap. Let's go to wide receivers. Please hit that little bell so you get notifications when we release new videos, and give us a thumbs up, please. Wide receivers, we're taking a look at Calvin Ridley. He got limited practice in on Wednesday and Thursday. He could be back after missing 1 game. And then the Lions receivers are really banged up. You've got Kenny Golladay and Danny Amendola both missed Thursday practice with hip injuries. They may both miss this week. Those are the 2 big ones I had on my list. John, let's go to you first on wide receivers. Talk to me about who you like at receiver.
And I definitely will in 10 seconds, but I also want to circle back on what you just said. It also kind of underscores a role for Adrian Peterson. He's the type of guy that can carry that offense a bit. And if Stafford's throwing thumb is messed up and you've got 2 receivers out, Peterson at $4,000 makes even more sense. Monitor practice on Friday, see who's going to play, but just keep that in mind as you're building lineups. Okay. Wide receiver, more of the same for me. Don't really love anybody this week, but the guys are on my list for cash games. Keenan Allen will be on my list pretty much for the end of the year. He's 7,400 going up against the Jets defense. I think that Adam Thielen is too cheap at 6,300. You're going to spend about $15,000 on Vikings if you do that, because you're going to have Cook in there already. So keep that in mind. Maybe you don't want that much exposure to the Vikings offense, I think you can go that way, though, against Dallas's defense. The other two guys that are actually three guys that are right around that 5K range. Devontae Parker going up. I have Dallas here, but I know that's wrong. Who are they?
Denver. At Denver.
Yep, at Denver. Brandin Cooks against New England, and in that same game, Jakobi Meyers, I think, is the play of the week in cash. So I ended with him, but he's probably the guy I would slot in first right after Dalvin Cook. They're using him like crazy. I mean, hell, he's throwing touchdown passes now. But those are the five guys that I would probably mix around. And I'll say this: we talked a little bit about strategy last week that seemed to resonate with folks. This is a week I absolutely am going to have at least 5 cash game lineups. What I'm going to do, I'll have at least 5. What I'll do is I'll build my player pool. I'll plug that into a lineup generator. I'll lock in guys like Dalvin Cook, like Jakobi Meyers, guys that I just really love. And then I'll let it build like the top 10 lineups. And then I'll pick the 5 that I like most. And then I'll distribute those across 50-50s. And as far as head-to-heads are concerned, I think if you have one that you like, because of the diversity of opponents, you don't need to do that, and you can pick your favorite. But this is a week where I absolutely am going to have multiple cash game lineups.
I think that when the pricing is tighter, it supports having multiple cash game lineups. I think there's a lot of pros that will play like one cash game lineup. It's like, this is my lineup for the week, and I'm rolling with it. But I think when the pricing's tighter, it opens up more opportunity to say, like, I'm going to play a few different lineups.
I think we've talked about, I was going to say, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but getting diversity every week is always a good strategy. So John mentioned 2 really good points there. Head-to-head is one way to do it. If you love the people that drive me crazy are people that put one cash game lineup into all 50-50s or all double-ups. The problem is you're going to win or you're going to lose because those games typically have about the same winning lineup. If you have a disparity of outcomes with head-to-head, you're going to get the full spectrum of a stuff to say you're going to face some guys that are all the way at the top and some guys that are towards the bottom.
Yep. And I like playing 3 different cash game lineups because I feel like if I'm good at what I'm doing, I'm gonna win at least 2 out of 3 of those lineups, and that means I'm gonna come out on top for the week. But finding head-to-heads is a great way to sort of make the wave a little bit less sharp each week in terms of win-lose. So find those head-to-heads that match your skill level. Devin, let's go to you and talk about receivers.
So since week 4, there is a receiver who is 50. What is he at? He is 5,600, and he is 5,600, and he is the 3rd in receiving yards. That player is T. Higgins. So T. Higgins for Cincinnati is 3rd in the league in receiving yards since week 4, 5,900. Apologies. And he's really turning into, him and Justin Jefferson are sort of setting the world on fire. I do like Jefferson too, maybe a little bit more than Thielen in cash. I think he's a little bit safer. Seeing more targets, not as much of the red zone work as Thielen, but I do think that this is both of these players are incredibly exciting. Jakobi Meyers is probably the play of the week. He's up there with Dalvin Cook as far as must play in cash. And then going down a little bit, I do like Terry McLaurin. I think he's turning into one of the safest guys in the NFL this season. Let's see. What are we doing of Michael Thomas?
With no Drew Brees.
7,300. 7,300. Well, Jameis Winston's going to start.
Is he gonna play the whole game though? I mean, is it when they get inside the red zone, are we going to see Taysom Hill and some wonky, weird offense? I mean, because I don't want any part of that. I mean, if that's going to be it, then I don't want it.
He had 5 targets with Winston in the second half, so I think that's the only part that makes me somewhat interested. He only had 2 in the first half with Breeze. I think if he's low, he's a decent GPP play at 7,300. He has upside that is Devontae Adams, and if if Atlanta has been good against running backs this year, if they sell out to stop Alvin Kamara, how else are they going to move the ball? I don't know.
By passing to Alvin Kamara.
Possibly.
I don't hate the call on Michael Thomas. I just get this funny feeling that the public sees the Jameis Winston thing as like a good move because they remember him from season-long fantasy football last year and, you know, how he was one of the top quarterbacks. And I think they're going to maybe take a look at the way that he did pepper Michael Thomas with inaccurate targets last week and maybe jump to the conclusion that this is exactly what he needs to, you know, jump back onto that top tier where we're used to seeing him. And it could very well happen. I know that I'll definitely have some. I'm just going to be looking very closely for tournaments at where the roster percentages are, and I don't think that I would be touching him in cash games.
Agreed.
Was
Phil,
it my
tell
turn?
me who? Yeah, Phil, tell me who you like at receiver.
Sure. So in cash, I'm pretty sure that everyone that's on my list has been mentioned. Did anybody say Deontay Johnson? Because we took some segues there.
I don't think so.
No, let's talk Pittsburgh receivers. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's the only one on my list then that we haven't discussed. And, you know, this guy has seen double-digit targets in every game that he both started and finished this season. That's pretty impressive. To get that for under 6K, I guess what we could say is that 5,900 price point is a sweet spot for wide receivers. Because, you know, I kind of feel the same way about him as I did about Duke Johnson. For the money, where are you getting that type of volume? And I think for cash games, that's what you're chasing. Also really like to call on Brandin Cooks, who I think that John mentioned. Again, I am just...
Are we doing Cooks in cash?
I would, yeah. I'm still on cash games. Okay. And I think John had mentioned him too in cash, right?
Yep.
I mean, why not? 8 targets is what he got last week. That was his lowest total over the last 5 games. So, you know, this is more of a cash viable receiver, I think, than people realize. And he's got upside because he's an explosive player. And if I'm willing to throw out last results for Houston because of that hurricane in Cleveland, then I'm definitely willing to give Brandin Cooks a pass, who was still involved. Moving on to GPPs, Keenan Allen is going to be the chalk that I'm most looking to fade this week in tournaments. To me, I think that a big part of his appeal all season has been his price point. He's usually hovering around 6 to 6.5, you know, in that neighborhood. Now he's like priced up near Julio Jones, and I'm not sure that he's got that type of I mean, the ceiling is there. I don't know. I just don't think that it is there in relation to where he's going to be rostered this week. I think that he is not as likely as his projection to reach like the, you know, 30-point threshold that we'd really be looking for in tournaments.
He violates the number one rule of this show. Don't start players against the Jets in the passing game.
Is that a rule? I'm about to break it again. So here's where I'm going in tournaments. I'm gonna leverage.
I meant in cash. In tournaments, do whatever you want.
Okay, yeah. In tournaments, I'm gonna leverage Allen's popularity, and I like both Mike Williams and even Jalen Guyton way down at 3,500. These are splash play receivers, and Justin Herbert, he could twirl a pretty nice deep ball. The Jets secondary this week. So they have the worst secondary in the league from a talent perspective by most accounts. All 3 of their starting cornerbacks are probably not playing. Brian Poole is on IR. Pierre Desir they waived. And in fairness, there probably is not a street free agent that they could get who's going to play worse than Pierre Desir was playing. But it's still a point. There's no continuity there. All of the faces are new. Also, Bless Austin, who's their other outside corner. He didn't practice today. So they could be, you know, completely fresh in that secondary. And Williams and Guyton are the kind of guys that could slip behind secondaries and make big plays. Both of them are going to be low rostered, particularly Guyton, who nobody really knows. But he's got long receptions of 72, 49, and 70 yards in games this season, and he's a terrific athlete. I really do think that trying to gain leverage on Allen is a good idea. Get those otherwise chalky Herbert stacks looking a little bit more unique. And then you could run it back even with a Jets receiver. But we'll get to the stacks later. Two more guys real quick for GPPs. I'm going to talk about DJ Chark every week. I think I mentioned him so much that the guys even stopped singing about him. It got boring. I love DJ Chark. I mean, he's everything that we want in a GPP wide receiver. And he's got the matchup against Pittsburgh, but that's going to be again a highly rostered combination. I think Roethlisberger and two of his wide receivers. And who's the run back going to be? I think you have to look to Chark. Pittsburgh has allowed the 10th most PPR fantasy points to enemy wide receivers this season, even though they're generally a good offense. But we've talked about it. When the pass rush doesn't get home, they could get burned deep. Chark would have had another long touchdown for a second consecutive game. Luton laid another one up, and the wind was so bad in the other direction in Green Bay last week, you actually saw the ball stop, and Chark had to come back for it, and the defender caught up and knocked it away. But he was gone for like another 60-plus yard touchdown. And I think that he could definitely do it this week against Pittsburgh. And my super thin play along the lines of Jakeem Grant last week, which I'm going to pat myself on the back. He was cash viable. Cam Sims in Washington. Okay, Cam Sims, 3,300.
Okay, let's move on. Listen, you talked enough about Jalen Guyton. Okay, Cam Sims, let's move on.
The people want the Jakeem Grant special.
They don't. They don't.
But that's not a cash gameplay, right? That's not a cash game.
This is beyond thin.
Okay.
I'm on GPP since I said Mike Williams.
All right,
okay.
Let's wrap this section up.
Yeah.
You got it.
Recap the cash game plays here. John, remind me, Jakobi Meyers, Keenan Allen.
Brandin Cooks, Adam Thielen, Devontae Parker.
Those are your 5 cash game plays. All right. Because you're going to diversify. Gotcha. Devin, cash game plays?
In order, Jakobi Meyers, T. Higgins, Justin Jefferson, Terry McLaurin, and that's it.
Those 4. Phil, cash game plays again?
My favorites are McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, and Brandin Cooks.
Got it. Okay. And we didn't mention Devontae Adams in this whole shenanigans here, probably because we're paying for Dalvin Cook and salaries tough to come by this week. But if some values open up later in the week, maybe Devontae Adams will be more popular.
Well, Phil took about 7 minutes talking about Jalen Guyton, so we didn't have time to mention Julio Jones or Devontae Adams. They're both good GPP plays every week. You don't need to talk about
Devontae Adams, by the way, is hurt. He did not practice today, ankle injury. And he kind of sounded as though on Wednesday he said that he was not certain that he was going to play. So he was a little non-committal. So just watch the news cycle there on Devontae Adams.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, he got limited practice on Wednesday, and then he didn't practice on Thursday. Okay, that's a good heads up.
That makes a good play in the next segment.
Yes. Now, please check out all our content over at footballguys.com/DFS. Let's talk tight ends. We're going to go to Phil first on tight ends. The only injury of note there, Noah Fant got limited practice on Thursday. John's been messing with my head on player pronunciations. He's got a rib injury, but it looks like he's going to go. Just keep an eye on it if you're thinking about playing him. Phil, talk about tight ends. John.
I'm tempted to talk about Cam Sims again instead of getting into the black hole that is the tight end position this week. This is just an ugly group of tight ends. It's been ugly all year, but we've got no Kelsey. We don't even have Darren Waller.
No Gronk.
I don't know what to tell you guys. I mean, in
Mark Andrews.
In cash games, I think what you have to do in order to fit in the guys that you want to play is probably spend down, possibly even below Mark Andrews. And I think Logan Thomas makes the most sense. We know Alex Smith likes throwing to tight ends, and Thomas is just too cheap for a bad position. He's been in double-digit fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. In the one that he missed, he had 6 targets. and the Bengals are allowing 72.6% more PPR fantasy points than league average to tight ends over the last 5 games. So for 3,300, I think you're getting a pretty good deal there. If you can't get up to Andrews, I do like Andrews as probably my top GPP tight end, even if he's popular, just because I just don't know where else we're going. And maybe he sees the field a little bit more with Nick Boyle out for the year. Now they kind of don't have an excuse to put him on the sideline as much. And then the only other guy I got for GPPs is Eric Ebron. I think he's a leverage play on the wide receivers in Pittsburgh, who are all going to be at least moderately popular, and the Jaguars don't discriminate when it comes to allowing fantasy points.
Devin, Mark Andrews, any other thoughts on tight ends?
It's Mark Andrews on DraftKings, and on FanDuel, it's Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst has 18 receptions in his last 3 games. I think he's starting to show why he was such a high draft pick in 2018 and really starting to become a bigger part of this offense, especially if Calvin Ridley is out.
Speaking of this sort of DraftKings FanDuel split here, we've got Taysom Hill at tight end on FanDuel, but he's a quarterback on DraftKings. If we get some sort of weird news out of New Orleans that makes us think that Taysom Hill is going to be playing some quarterback, that might get interesting over at FanDuel. Just keep your ears out a little bit on that one.
It's thin, though. I mean,
yeah, I think so.
For him to hit GPP value, he's going to have to do more than rush for a touchdown. Like, right. I don't know.
It's probably not a thing, but it's just weird to have a player at a different position on 2 different sites.
Now,
John,
if Winston gets hurt, I mean, what is there, a 5 or 10% chance that a quarterback gets hurt in a game? Maybe he's interesting in that scenario. I don't know, but I'm not playing him.
Yeah, John, what do you think? Tight end.
For cash games, I do think it's Logan Thomas or Robert Tonyan, especially if we hear that Devontae Adams is inactive. This is a team, they're going up against the Colts. The Colts actually don't allow a lot of big plays. They play a zone defense. They push a lot of underneath action. They'll let you get the short pass, but not the long one to beat them. And that's exactly the type of route that Tunyan's going to run. And I think that play becomes really sharp if Devontae Adams is not active. And if we're hearing he's not playing, and you listen to what Phil said earlier, that maybe become one of my favorite plays of the week. On the GPP side, I do like the Andrews call. I'm not sure I make him cash viable. I mean, I think he probably is cash viable, for being honest, but I'm not spending up at tight end. It's the most volatile position outside of defense. And so if I can punt with players I feel as confident about, that's where I'm going to go. And then the other guy I have written down is Dallas Goedert. Saying that on purpose for the audience.
Goddard?
Yes, Goedert. That's what I said. Last week, I think I went on record to tell everybody to fade him. He might have even been in my article as a fade this week. I'm telling you to play him. He comes off as my top value right now, and I've got him at about 11% to make GPP value at 3,800 on DraftKings. And it looks like, I don't know, Devin, you probably have him somewhere between 7 to 10%. That's my guess. Is that accurate?
I have him at 11 right now, but yeah.
Okay, so if he's 11, it's about right. That's where it should be. So, but I do think that he's a decent GPP play this week, and he lines up with some of the commentary that the guys spoke out on Carson Wentz earlier today.
And I think it's Robert Tonyan, isn't it? Tonyan sounds like an appetizer you'd get at TGI Fridays or something.
It rhymes with Funyun.
Does it really? Okay, just making sure. I thought John was messing with us again. Okay, so let's recap our tight ends here. For cash, Devin, Mark Andrews.
Mark Andrews if you're going up on DraftKings, Logan Thomas if you're going down on DraftKings, Hayden Hurst on FanDuel.
And Phil, you said what at tight end?
Logan Thomas for cash.
Yep. And John, tight end?
Logan Thomas or Robert Tonyan.
Got it. All right. Let's go a little quicker through defenses so that we have time for stacks. That's one of people's favorite sections.
Atlanta Falcons, I'm done.
Excellent. What do you think, John?
I'll echo the Falcons, and I think I'll double up with the Broncos against Miami, but both are great plays.
All right, Phil.
Give me Cleveland against Carson Wentz.
All right, I like it. Let's go to stacks. We can spend a little more time on stacks. That's the fun stuff. Let's go to Phil first on stacks. Who are you stacking this week?
I will take Roethlisberger, and then you could pick any two of Chase Claypool, Deontay, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Eric Ebron. Run it back with DJ Chark. We already mentioned Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Derrick Henry. I think you could go full game stack there if you wanted to and throw A.J. Brown or Jonnu Smith in as an additional run back. And the other one that I had also already said, give me the contrarian Air Bear stack with Herbert, Mike Williams, Jalen Guyton, and I'll run it back with Joe Flacco favorite, Rashad Perryman.
All right. John, talk to me about some stacks.
All right, but before I will, Devin, can you look up a percent rostered for me, Mike Davis? Before I do stacks, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to say these are the players you need to avoid, one at each position. Do you have that? 12. All right. Does that fit in? Yes, it still fits. One player at each position. I'm going to go against what Phil just told you. I would stay away from the Chargers passing game this week. I think it's going to be an unsharp play. So the Air Bear gets faded by a tip and pick. Mike Davis, even at 12%, is too high against Detroit. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I do not like Keenan Allen, I think for the same reason that Phil called earlier, but also fade Julio Jones against New Orleans. And then keeping in theme with fading the Chargers passer game, fade Hunter Henry. In terms of stacks, okay, so those are guys you want to avoid. I want to be very clear here.
That's avoid in GPPs because of roster percentages?
Correct.
Got it, okay.
Yep, you want to fade those guys this week. Not to say that any of them are bad players. They're just bad plays in reference to their popularity with the field. In terms of some of the guys I have written down, Dalvin Cook this week is going to be super popular, probably the most popular player in the slate. We already heard this from Devin. I think you can leverage some of that and go opposite. We know that Kirk Cousins has two very good receivers in the form of Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Go ahead and stack those guys up to be contrarian, because if Cook doesn't score, you know it's going to be those guys who do, and you can run it back with Zeke. We've already talked about that. I do love, we're talking about Mike Davis, fading him. The three receivers that come out way high for me this week in terms of GPP ratings are all Carolina receivers: DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Curtis Samuel. And because they come out high, guess who else comes high? It's either going to be PJ Walker or Teddy Bridgewater, whoever the heck.
It's going to be Walker.
And
Bridgewater was ruled out.
Is that done? Is that official?
Rappaport said he's unlikely to start.
Okay, so PJ Walker's $4,800. It's a tremendous play this week. I mean, I don't know how popular he's going to get going into the weekend, but as of Thursday night, super sharp
my
play.
Best stack.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't say that. And then I've already said the other one. That is Lamar Jackson to Andrews. I know, Devin, you like that one. And then run it back with Derrick Henry, because I do believe he's going to be under rostered for the type of upside and skill that he brings to the scenario.
All right, Devin. Tell us the stack we've already heard.
PJ Walker, Robbie Anderson, college teammates, both at Temple. If he's going to rely on one guy, it's going to be Anderson, who's their number one receiver there. One other matchup is Carson Wentz and Travis Fulgham. I think Fulgham is a good enough receiver that he's going under the radar, and he has the most favorable matchup going up against Terrence Mitchell in Cleveland.
Nice. Those are some good off-the-board stacks, fellas. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com. We'll be back next Wednesday morning with our special double Thanksgiving episode. Every year we do 2 episodes for the Thanksgiving week. One covers the Thanksgiving slate that's so popular, and then the other covers the main slate. So be sure to check out both of our episodes for next week. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching, and thanks for being a football guy. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS by clicking the button in front of Devin's face. And if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to press the button that's on Phil's face. And if you want to see our latest video, click that giant box that's in front of John Lee's face. Check all that stuff out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.